Welcome back to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Graham Richmond, and I'm joined by co-host Alex Brown. Alex, welcome back to what's going to be another episode of Wiretaps here on the podcast.
Looking forward to it, Graham.
So as everyone knows, Alex has picked out 4 profiles of individuals who've shared their background on ApplyWire on clearadmit.com, and we're just going to offer up some advice to those folks, kind of break down their candidacies and help them put their best foot forward when they apply. In the meantime, I did want to mention a few things. This is going to be a really busy week for kind of round 1 MBA admissions, and it's really marked by the fact that Harvard Business School will be issuing interview invitations to first-round candidates on October 1st, which is tomorrow. So everybody stay tuned for that. One of the things that we try to do, since we know that waiting can be quite difficult, is we open up a chat room for Harvard candidates during the admission season and particularly on these kinds of days. So look for the chat room on the website. Hang out there. You can console fellow candidates who are also waiting nervously for news from HBS, and just enjoy spending time with other people there. It's pretty easy to find on the site. There's even a menu item there. So check that out. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Just to know exactly what will happen is at noon, Harvard will be releasing interview invites. So everybody that applied in round 1 for HBS will all hear at the same time. So that's their process, which is actually a lot easier on the nerves, I think, than some others. And then hopefully a lot of the candidates will update their an entry on Livewire telling us that they've got an interview invite or whatever it might be, and that would be fantastic.
Yeah, and this is the first year that Harvard's going to release all the interview invites in one batch. They used to do them in 2 batches, so we'll see how that goes. They've typically come out on time, although there have been some years where they were a little bit late, so we'll see how that goes. But stay tuned. In other big news, I guess, Forbes did their ranking last week. We've started to see some activity on the website for Livewire with people reporting Yale interview invitations. Those will continue to trickle out. And obviously some INSEAD and Columbia acceptances due to those programs' different timings with January start dates and stuff. So just stay tuned. Keep sharing your updates on Livewire. We love to see that. But without further ado, I guess we should dive in and take a look at the candidates. What do you say, Alex?
Yeah, let's get going.
All right, so Wiretaps candidate number 1. This person is looking to start in 2020. They are currently working in investment banking at what they refer to as a second-tier firm, hoping to make the transition over to consulting, working for Bain, BCG, McKinsey, or Accenture. GMAT score 720, GPA is 3.5. They've been working for 4.5 years, currently in New York City, and hoping to stay in the Big Apple post-MBA. And in their note, they mentioned that they're basically wanting to use the MBA to transition from finance to strategy consulting. They also shared that they already have an MS in finance from a reputable school, and they did that about 3 years ago, it sounds like. They also mentioned they have strong extracurricular activities in volunteering, and they're targeting Columbia, Tuck, Ross, Kellogg, Stern, Booth, and Yale SOM. So that's the profile. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that they also said they love our podcast and that they've listened to almost all the episodes, so we thank them for that. Alex, what do you make of this candidate?
Well, the fact that they love our podcast is why we're talking about them, so that's fantastic. But obviously also interesting candidate. Very finance-oriented to date, and we talked about this a little bit before we came on air about that. And one thing the candidate doesn't want to come across as is someone that just wants to leave finance and start something else. So making sure that their goals are forward-focused, i.e. they're passionate about wanting to do strategy consulting, and I think ultimately they wanted to get into private equity, which obviously is finance related, but making sure that that's feasible and doable also, because that can be challenging, even coming out of the best consulting firms and so on and so forth. The guy being gender neutral, I'm not sure if we know the gender, is, like you say, has an MS in finance, so he's going to be heavily labelled as a finance guy at this point. So there may be some challenges there. what I thought was interesting is that they have strong extracurriculars whilst pursuing a career in investment banking. So their time management skills must be outstanding. Because if there's anything that I've heard in terms of the horror stories of investment banking is they make you work very, very hard.
That's correct.
Anyway, so those were some of my initial thoughts. Obviously, from a stat standpoint, everything is reasonably standard. For someone that's applying to top MBA programs, they're not applying to the very, very top, right? So I saw Harvard, Wharton, and Stanford were not on the list. So there's a little bit of realism, I think, in terms of the school targeting here. A mix of M7 and top 16 in their suite. So overall, I think there is some good stuff to like here. It's going to require great execution on their candidacy and just sort of make sure that they don't fall foul of coming across as a candidate that's just wanting to get out of what they're currently doing.
Yeah, I was like, I kind of was of two minds on this candidate. So on the one hand, I was sort of worried because I'm like, well, 723.5 those are both perfectly fine. But if you're, I'm making some assumptions, but let's assume it's like a white guy in New York City, right, working in banking. Those numbers don't jump off the page. And so there's going to be competition there. I also was just a little, I was having a little trouble following the kind of career plan, this idea of, well, I'm in finance, I want to go do strategy consulting to get into PE. Now, there are people who go from the top strategy consulting firms into private equity, but there are also a lot of people who go from the top investment banks into private equity or hedge funds or, these kind of more coveted roles. And so I was a little confused there. The other thing I kind of just was curious about was what was the GPA in the MS degree? Because that would be another data point that as an admissions reader, I'd want to be considering. Hopefully it's sort of on par, but if it's low, that could be a bit of a concern or just a strike against. I wanted to, the other thing that was missing for me was like, is there any like industry passion? Or is there a storyline here of, wow, I've really enjoyed investment banking. It's honed my quantitative skills, but as I'm doing these deals, I'm seeing the more strategic decision-making from afar. I'm on the sidelines of that, and I want to get involved in that. And so I want to make this move to consulting because ultimately I think that would round out my skill set and help me be a great private equity investor or something. So I just need to hear that storyline. And I like it when someone has an industry focus. So, imagine if this person had said, I've been doing investment banking, I'm focused on the healthcare sector, and post MBA, I want to go to firms A, B, or C in consulting that do a lot of work with healthcare, and then like weave that thread, through and even do PE investing in the healthcare domain. So that would be a kind of a difference maker for me. So I just needed a little more to get sold on this candidacy. And again, it's not like I'm saying they need to retake the GMAT or anything. I mean, their numbers are good. It's just that even they don't have Harvard, Stanford, or Wharton on the list, but these schools are good schools and they all have averages that are, 720 or north of that, right? So it's that's all. I was just kind of a little worried that there's not enough meat on like the storyline to give me, and maybe that'll come out in the essays. I presume it would. It's hard to convey that in a Applywire entry anyway, right? So that was my take.
And you make some very good points, I think, and also, we know from this person's posts on Applywire that they have strong extracurriculars. We just don't know what they are. And maybe that helps shed some light on the overall story. What are they passionate about outside of, their working in direct work in investment banking? And that might lend to a whole nother dimension to the candidacy that would be very interesting to AdCom. But, overall, the numbers fit for the schools that they're applying. They fit right in the middle. And, like you've said, if they can sort of dot their I's, cross their T's, show some personality and really sort of fine tune and execute well, I think the school list is on the money, Graham. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only other thing I was going to add is that if they really want to get into PE from consulting, the better the consulting firm they go to, the better off they'll be, which then does bring up that issue of the fact that sometimes, the Bains or McKinseys of the world ask for your GMAT scores and look at that. And so, I've seen candidates actually retake the test after they get into business school just to have a really great score so they can kind of wow the powers that be at some of the consulting firms. But that's just something to keep in the back of their mind as well.
Yeah, and the better if you want MBB consulting directly, you need to get into the very best business school that you can.
Yeah, agreed.
In terms of getting access to the top tier consulting firms. So, very good.
All right, so let's move on and talk about Wiretap's candidate number 2. This candidate is an early bird. They want to start business school in 2022. They are currently working in industrial manufacturing. They're hoping to make the transition over to consulting and then maybe tech. And they're targeting Bain, BCG, and McKinsey. I sound like a broken record sometimes with these. GPA 3.6, 4 years of work experience would be at the time that they are applying. They clarified that for us. They want to be in the USA, and they are targeting Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and Wharton. And there were a couple of interesting, tidbits here. I don't know if you want to walk us through, but, this person, the profile sounds fairly pedestrian on the surface, but they have kind of an interesting personal background. So maybe you can walk us through some of the back and forth that you had. I believe you left them some comments on their profile and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, the basic profile here I think is very good. They're from the sub-Saharan, Africa, which adds an interesting dimension, even though they're currently in the United States. They want to work consulting, and then in the long run, I guess, in the renewable energy space. And they're currently working in sort of engineering manufacturing in the power generation sector. So their concern and their question to us, Graham, was basically, they recognize that the MBA allows them to switch careers, but will it allow them to switch sort of industries and function? And that was their concern. And then that sort of also, given that this person is planning ahead, so is applying in a couple of years' time, it begs the question, should the person make the transition now to the renewable energy sector and get that sort of transition under their belt before they go to business school, so that in business school they're only then seeking to then transition into consulting rather than the two transitions directly in business school. So my quick advice, and then I'll let you comment on it because I think you might have a more detailed perspective, was if they can make the transition now to renewable energy, that might well be a good thing to do. But what they should do is look at the opportunities that they have now currently in the power generation sector and what that looks like over the next couple of years, versus their opportunities potentially in the renewable energy sector, and see which of the two opportunities really allows them to grow and develop, have impact, and prepare themselves for their next steps. But I would say that given that they're applying in a couple of years' time, that it might make sense to make that move now. What would you think?
Yeah, I'm on the fence about this because on the one hand, I'm like, well, they're working in the power generation sector. And so, it's not renewables, it sounds like, but it's in the energy sector. Or maybe I'm misunderstanding. I presume that's what they mean by power generation. So they're not so far afield. Like if they were in a completely different field, I would say, yeah, why don't you try to make that shift? It'll lend credence to your goals and give you more. It'll make you more believable when you talk about this career plan. I agree. Like, it'd be nice to know, like, what's the path that they could be on if they stay at their current employer. If there's some great leadership opportunity there, then they might want to just go for it. But if there is some other job out there that they've got an offer for and it really is more exactly in line with their career plan, then why not? Obviously they still need to take the GMAT, and there was some discussion about that, and they're aiming for a big score, so that'd be great. I think that the fact that they're from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, is really interesting, and should be I want that to come out in the application if possible. Like, I don't know if it's going to tie into their goals, or maybe their renewable goals are Africa focused or something, but it would be good to see that.
Yeah, I mean, they state that their goals are, in the long run, in the renewable energy space, preferably serving a developing country, if the opportunity presents itself. So my response to that is, don't as candidates, you can't just wait for opportunities to reveal themselves. You need to have that ambition and that sort of wherewithal to go seek out those opportunities. And given, like you say, Graham, that this person is from sub-Saharan Africa, clearly they already have ties to developing economies. From their own background. So even now, starting to learn more about those opportunities and potentially seeking them out and so on and so forth has to be the right thing to do. And this person clearly has the wherewithal to apply to top schools if they, get the GMAT score that they're targeting, right? So I think they're trying to target a 750 GMAT, which is a ridiculously high score. So fair play if they think they can get that. But why not? They've got a 3.6 GPA in electrical engineering, so clearly this person is a bit of a rocket scientist or something in terms of, they have the smarts, right? So at the end of the day, I love the fact that they're going through this sort of decision-making process and thinking about it 2 years out. They've got a great potential profile, long-term goals of very laudable and can make perfect sense based on their background. So I'm hoping, and obviously the person lists the best schools, but I'm hoping that in a couple of years' time this person gets access to one of these top schools, because clearly they've got the chops to do well and to have high impact in the long run.
Yeah, and I would say one thing they should also work on is developing that list of potential target companies in terms of the long term. Because right now they just mentioned Tesla, Tesla-like company. I think Tesla's like, it's a household name, and it's a pretty popular kind of post MBA target these days. We always see these new companies kind of creeping into the top destinations list, and that's one that comes up a lot. So I would be assured if they had a couple of other companies that are working in the space that maybe I hadn't heard of, but that do hire MBAs, or so yeah, work on that. But they have plenty of time. There's still a lot of time, and I think just working on the GMAT score and excelling at work is going to be half the battle, I think.
Yeah, and just they're mentoring kids interested in STEM, which makes perfect sense based on their own background. And I would say continue to do that. AgCom love people that do mentoring, giving back, and that kind of stuff. And to the extent that they can ratchet that up a little bit, if they're passionate about it, obviously, that would sort of really complement what all else looks like a potentially very strong candidacy.
All right. Well, thanks to that poster for sharing their profile. Let's move on and discuss Wiretaps candidate number 3. So this person's looking to start school in the fall of 2020. So they're in the application process right now. They've got 3 years of experience in software engineering, followed by 3 years of experience in Big Four consulting. They want to kind of make a post-MBA career, a little bit of a transition. I mean, the first phase is going to be consulting, but then into tech. And so the companies that are going to target right out of business school are Bain, Booz Allen Hamilton, BCG, McKinsey. GMAT score 690, 3.7 GPA, 6 years of work experience. And this person's in Africa and wants to work in the US after doing the MBA. And the target schools are Columbia, MIT, and NYU. This person mentions that they did their undergraduate degree in computer science from a small liberal arts college in the northeast of the U.S. And they want to use the MBA to kind of transition into a management consulting role. And they did actually offer up the fact that they're planning to retake the GMAT and push the score up into the 700s. 700, 720 was their guesstimate on the range. And they also mentioned they've been pretty active, with leadership roles, both in college and at their place of work now. So what do you make of this person? You had some nice back and forth with them on the site. So
Yeah. I mean, again, someone that has some ambition and passion about doing something in Africa, that's always a good thing in terms of overall impact in the long run. You can make more impact in developing countries than you can in mature economies, as it were. So I think that's very good. Obviously, Africa Heritage, they're from Africa, I think. They're from Nigeria. So that's very good. They like you say, 690 GMAT is. I mean, it's a decent GMAT score. The schools they've listed, Columbia, Sloan, and Stern, will be admitting people with 690s on the GMAT. But if they think that they can squeeze some more points out of that, that's a very good thing to do the retake, get that 710, 720, 30, or whatever it might be. So they're planning on attempting to do that. So I think that's good. It's very proactive, and so forth. So yeah, I like the fact that in the long run they plan to be back in Nigeria. That to me is a real important aspect of their candidacy. So this seems like a bit of an Africa themed Wiretaps episode today. But you know, they did well in undergrad. 3.7 software engineering is obviously. Or computer science, and then they've gone into software engineering, then Big Four consulting. So they've sort of evolved their career, pre MBA. Nothing really necessarily standing out there, but pretty good, solid stuff for these top schools that to which they're applying. Overall, ace that GMAT. And I would think maybe adding a few more schools to the list. I wrote in my notes Wharton, Kellogg, and Tuck. Obviously interesting, programs, especially if they're targeting consulting coming straight out of business school. So those were some of my thoughts, Graham.
Yeah, and those are spot on. I mean, I think there were a few things that jumped out at me. Number one, the fact that this is a Nigerian candidate, but who did a U.S. Liberal arts college, I think really helps. That sets that person apart from folks who might be applying from Nigeria who've never left Nigeria, right? So this person has kind of an added dimension to their candidacy because of that. I think that the goals seem fine. I mean, in terms of doing consulting and then helping with the family business in Nigeria, which also sounds like it's a consultancy. So it all makes sense. I agreed absolutely with you. Cast a wider net. Like I think I don't understand. It's almost like this person. I feel like they're like, well, I just want to be in either New York or Boston, and they know that maybe their numbers aren't quite Harvard level, so they just left that off the list. But they have CBS, NYU, and MIT, and that's kind of it. So I would absolutely encourage them to cast a wider net. They could stay Northeast and still add a handful of schools, whether it's, a UVA, a Wharton, a Tuck, a Cornell. I mean, there are a bunch of schools in there that, do some placement with consulting firms. So I think that, boosting the GMAT is also going to be pretty important. I know, as you said, some people get in with a 690, but, as we've just kind of done a lot of deep dives into the numbers with a report that ClearAdmit published about, round one applicants to the M7 schools, you can see, that these averages they just keep creeping up, and 730 it's not a shocker anymore. That's kind of a lot of these schools are hitting that as their average. So taking the test again is a good idea and boosting the score. So I'm hoping to see that they do that. And I think if they do that, they should have a nice story to tell.
Yeah. Just one point I wanted to bring up, Graham, that I realised we didn't address is on the extracurricular side currently. And I'll quote from the profile that they posted. It says, I was a student leader in various roles during my time in college, which is fantastic. And I'm also active at my current place of work in some volunteer clubs. So what do you think about that current extracurricular type of activity?
I mean, I think it really depends on what type of work they're doing with the employer. Like, I know that, sometimes it's like, if this means that like once every quarter they're going to a soup kitchen because work gives people a half day off to go do it, that's less interesting to me than if maybe they have a leadership role in one of these, kind of work clubs that does volunteer work or outreach or something. So I'd want to know more. But hopefully there's enough there for them to show that they're engaged and that they have another dimension to their candidacy.
And what are they doing outside of work? What sort of things are they passionate about and interested in? If there's a theme there to draw out in the application, obviously, that would also be quite helpful. But yeah, I think this candidate with a slightly higher GMAT score is definitely in the running at the schools that they've listed, and I think like we've both said, they should cast their net a little wider and maybe even take a punt at the likes of Wharton or something like that.
Yeah, agreed. All right, well, good advice. Thanks again to that person for their post, and now we'll move on and discuss Wiretaps candidate number 4. So this one was one of the more interesting candidates. We've got someone with a pre-MBA career in economic consulting, and they're looking to attend business school next fall. And GMAT is 660, GPA 3.72, 4 years of work experience, looking to get into VC or private equity, and targeting companies. Let's see, we've got Omega Funds, Bessemer, a whole bunch of different, Summit Partners, Veritas Capital. They have a whole bunch of firms listed here. They're located in San Francisco and want to remain at least in California. And the target schools are Berkeley, Stanford, UCLA, which you would expect, and then Columbia and Chicago are the two non-California schools on the list. And it sounds like the background is in not just economic consulting, but specifically with a healthcare angle as well. And this person actually notes that they think that their background in healthcare and economic consulting sets them apart from other applicants who are typically targeting these programs. So what's your take on this candidacy? There was a lot of back and forth on ApplyWire where you kind of offered up some advice and had some good dialogue. But yeah, what do you think about this person?
Yeah, there's a lot to like about this candidate. They're obviously smart, the 3.7 GPA. Their experience sounds very good. They clearly feel, and they should have a good sense of this. All candidates should have a good sense in terms of their own work experience and how that compares to their peers and others applying to business school. And they feel pretty confident that they've got a good set of experience. So that's very good. There are a couple of things that stood out to me and basically formed my lines of inquiry with the candidate. And we've had, like you say, we've had some back and forth on ApplyWire. One is this idea that they want to, post-MBA, go into VC, private equity or venture capital or both. One's related to the other, I guess. And my default is always caution to that ambition. If they don't have that experience going into business school, because I think it's very hard to gain access to that industry. That said, this person's already done some interviewing and appears to recognize a pathway to get into private equity and VC that they think the MBA will allow them to do based on their own endeavor there. So I think it's good that they've already gone down that path and they've tested the water and discovered what they might do to be successful there. That said, to break into private equity VC, you need to go to the very top schools, I would imagine. Those would increase your opportunity to get that access. And to get to the very top schools, you need outstanding application by all measures. And the elephant in the room here is clearly the GMAT score. They got a 660. Everything else, so you can imagine everything else on this candidate is absolutely outstanding. I mean, it might just be very good, but let's just assume it's all outstanding. And you have a 660 GMAT score. Logically, you could say, well, the GMAT's not a great reflection. Clearly 3.7 GPA, great work experience supported by terrific recs, yada, yada, yada. Outstanding candidate, we should admit him. Or her. But the counter-argument to that is, well, what about the candidate that has all the same real quality as this candidate, but has the 740 GMAT? That makes that candidate stronger, right? So, and then they came back and said, well, I've taken the test a couple of times, both 660. So I'm thinking, well, maybe they're a poor standardized test taker and they can come up with some optional essay that addresses this issue and so forth and tries to mitigate the issues, etc. But then they revealed that the reason for the lower score was actually due to some work issues, some turmoil at work, not the person personally, I don't think, but the work environment itself. They were reducing employee numbers, and the person was having to work extra hours and this, that, and the other, and they just weren't able to prepare particularly well for the GMAT on both occasions, right? So my refrain to that is, well, if I'm an AdCom, I want to see you come back the third time and show us, with great preparation, that you can nail that GMAT. And this is the reason why I selected this candidate for wiretaps. It's really important. It doesn't matter how good your overall profile is. You need to present your best candidacy and not leave anything on the table when you're applying to top schools, because that's what your peers are doing when they're applying for the same spots that you're seeking. So I really hope this candidate does double down, nail the GMAT, so it's not an issue, and surely with everything else in their profile will have opportunities at the schools that they list, and maybe even they could add a couple more schools to that list.
Yeah, I was concerned about this candidacy. I mean, I love the healthcare and economic consulting kind of background, and I think it's always nice to see, a candidate with, kind of a clear set of goals. Like they obviously, as you said, they've been interviewing for PE and VC type jobs and they haven't gotten them, but they've learned something from that, and, strong GPA. So there were a lot of things to like, but there were a few things that really made me concerned. So the first was, and, I don't want to call this person out or put them down, but I thought that the note was interesting in that they said, I feel that my background in healthcare and economic consulting sets me apart from other applicants. And I think it does to an extent, but I think part of me was like, okay, are they hoping that it sets them apart enough to overcome a 660? And the answer is, if we're talking about, the schools that are on their list, probably not. I think there'll be other kids with, so I was really worried about that. And then the section where they explained the results on the test was also a little concerning to me, because it wasn't I've always historically been awful at standardized tests, and, SATs, it was the same thing. And I'm going to write a note that just explains that and encourages the committee to look at my 3.7 GPA and to hear what my recommenders have to say about my, abilities. But instead it was, they were laying people off at work, and I was nervous and I was overworked during that time period, to which I agree with you, Alex. Then it's like, well, okay, then take the test again under better circumstances and get the score that is more befitting of your aptitude, right? So I'm just worried that, and the reason that this strikes a chord in me, if I sound a little kind of upset about it or whatever, is because I too applied to business school with a low GMAT score the first time. And I thought, I've got this really interesting kind of startup background. I studied art history, and I actually had a 660 as well. And I was like, that I'll get through. And this was when the averages were only 690 or something at the top schools, because I'm a bit older than this candidate, obviously. And so I thought, I'll get through, watch me, and all I got was some wait lists and rejections. And luckily, one kind soul in admissions office who said, look, we know you're smart from your GPA. This test score is not really adding up. Why, take it again. And so I had to reapply, and I took a class and ended up with a much higher score. So I think that's maybe why it's striking me, because I'm like, I'm worried about this candidate going in with hopes too high. And I also, it'd be nice to know more about this whole VC PE path. Meaning, is there a healthcare interest? Is that like, are they going to, like I said earlier in this podcast, like, is there some thread, some industry that fits based on their background to date that they're passionate about and that they want to carry through into the VC or PE domain? And if so, if it were healthcare, then I'd be like, well, the schools on your list may not be the right ones in some instances, right? So it depends on what they want to do. But I didn't understand the transition and why they want to do it. I wanted to know more there. And that's something that's easy for them to address. They just have to think through what it is they want to do. So that's my take on this candidate. I fear that if they apply to the schools on their list, with this existing set of numbers that they might strike out or end up with, a wait list here or there and a long wait and maybe not an acceptance. So I think they need to do something about this.
I think we agree on that, Graham. I think clearly,
Yeah.
that said, potentially a very good candidate. I think they just need to fix a couple of things, and if they do that, then they could have some terrific opportunities. The nice thing is, it's fixable.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I just wanted to mention, so those are our 4 candidates for the week. And again, thanks, Alex, for picking those out. Always good discussion that I think is fruitful for even those who, are just listening in and it's not their candidacy that we're talking about. At least that's our goal. I did want to encourage everyone to download a special report that we released this past week. It's free if you're a registered member of the ClearAdmit site, which doesn't cost anything. So if you register and log into the site, you can download a report that we published, which we called our kind of Livewire Insights report on the M7 schools, so the top 7 MBA programs, what kind of candidates they're typically interviewing, who they're typically offering acceptance letters to, and in terms of GMAT and GPA, and also just the timing. So if you're a nervous candidate wondering when is my school going to issue invitations, when has it historically happened, or when do the acceptance letters go out based on the published date that they state versus the reality that we've been tracking in Livewire for the last several years. This report has that information. So I just want to encourage everyone to grab it. And obviously, please continue to rate and review this podcast. We had an absolutely wonderful email from someone earlier this week who was a Wiretaps feature candidate that we kind of reviewed their candidacy. And they said, imagine my surprise when I tuned into the podcast and heard my own profile being assessed, and they just thanked us for that. It was a really wonderful email to see. So keep the feedback coming. Alex and I really love it. And just continue to tune in. Alex, anything else that you had for this week? Again, busy week with Harvard coming up tomorrow. We hope to see everyone hanging out on the website in the chat room and discussing.
Yeah, obviously, best of luck for everyone that has applied to Harvard in round 1 and other schools and waiting. And I'd just say, like you say, the email that we received yesterday from the candidate that was surprised to have been highlighted on Wiretaps. I think I do remember us discussing that candidate, Graham, and I think we did actually give the candidate some advice they probably weren't necessarily expecting when they first posted on ApplyWire. So the nice thing about that is hopefully our conversations can actually have some influence and some impact, which is what we're trying to achieve here.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point. Well, Alex, thanks as always for joining me to do this. And everyone stay tuned. We'll be back, regular editions all through the admissions season. So tune in every Monday and you'll get the latest, in terms of what's happening in the MBA admissions process.
Very good. Thanks, Graham.
All right. We'll see everybody soon.